New York Giants fans, training camp is almost here. Ed Valentine of Big Blue View here with you to talk New York Giants and here to help me break down what we can expect to see in training camp is Patricia Traina of Giants on SI and Locked On Giants. So, Patty, welcome back to the show and welcome to another season of New York Giants football.
School's back in session already. I mean, I feel like we just started our summer break not too long ago.
I know the Giants this year did something interesting. A lot of their rookie mini camp, their mandatory mini camp was a week later than most teams held their camps. And I wonder what the reason for that was, but I know that it shortened our summer break. It feels like we just got started.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, Patty, let's get right into it. Let's talk about the Giants. It's been an active, interesting off season. Lots of moves by Joe Shane, Brian Daboll, interesting draft picks, uh, changes throughout the roster. And I want to ask you, you know, how you feel about this 90-man roster. I have said, and I think I said on your show as well, that I feel like this roster is better or potentially better across the roster. I look at ESPN this morning, and ESPN did their league wide roster rankings and still has the Giants 27th in the NFL among NFL rosters. I haven't studied every roster. I think they have to be somewhat better than that. Um, just your thoughts on the roster they're bringing to training camp, and the offseason that they've had.
Yeah, I think a lot of these outlets that have the Giants roster ranked so low, I think it's muscle memory at this point. It's like, show me, it's like
Hmm.
until you show me you're better, you're going to be in the bottom of the rankings. But I think this is probably the deepest roster that Joe Shane has assembled since he's become GM. There's going to be a lot of competition across the board. And, a true indication of how good the roster really was, we won't find this out until obviously after training camp is over, but how many guys get picked up by other teams? Now, in the past, you might see a couple guys get picked up here and there, but I think this year, potentially, you might see more that don't make this Giants team get picked up elsewhere. And if that's the case, then you can go back and you can say that this was a much deeper roster and a roster that should have been maybe ranked a little bit higher than a lot of these outlets gave it credit for.
That's a good point because, over the last decade, getting cut by the Giants has been a death sentence for a lot of careers. It's been, there have been a lot of guys who did more than maybe hang around on practice squads on other teams. But I think there are quite a few guys who are NFL caliber players who are going to be competing for jobs. And if they don't make it with the Giants, they'll wind up on other teams' 53-man rosters. And as you said, I think that's a really good thing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, overall, I mean, you go from front to back, from, the offensive backfield all the way to the defensive backfield and special teams. You've I would say they're deeper just about every position. Now, that doesn't mean that, having bodies means quality. That's still to be
Right.
determined. And I still have question marks about a couple of spots on the team, but overall, the areas in which they were weakest last year, I think you can honestly say that Joe Shane devoted a lot of resources to fixing those areas.
Hmm. Let's talk about offense. Entering training camp. Obviously, the Giants made a bet this offseason, and that really the only big change, the only major change that they needed was at quarterback. And obviously, with Russell Wilson, with Jameis Winston, with Jackson Dart, they've completely transformed what some people think is the most interesting quarterback room in the NFL. Not the best, but the most interesting, just because of the personalities. Um, do you feel like do you feel like that was a good bet to make? And what are your, beyond quarterback, maybe, what are your questions when you look at this offense?
I don't think you could totally blame the Giants' problems last year just on the quarterback position. Was it a big part of it? Absolutely. Do I think that the, Colts game and the good quarterback play that they got in that game maybe reinforced the argument that, "Hey, it's not the rest of the offense, it's the quarterback"? I think that was definitely the case, but that being said, you know, the receivers were still dropping passes. I mean, Malik Neighbors, as good as he was, he dropped, what, 8 or 9 passes last year, which was most on the team. The offensive line depth was not very good, after injuries started settling in. Even the starting 5 that they began week 1 with last year, um, decent as pass pro. Although I did a study on that, over on New York Giants on SI, and actually you break down the numbers, and it was maybe not as good as you thought it would be. And then the run game too. You look at the run game and how many times were these guys getting to the second level to pick off linebackers to create huge holes for the running back. So there were some other issues on the offense. It's not all on the quarterback. But that being said, they believe that, by upgrading the quarterback play, that it's going to fix a lot of problems. And we'll see. I mean, we'll see if it does or not. But I do think that there were other little things that kind of, when you add them all together, affected the offense and its output.
Patty, we'll talk more about defense later, but when we talk about the offense, they were, 30th and 31st in points the last 2 years. I think they averaged 15 and a half points or 15.6 points per game in 2024. They don't have to be an offensive juggernaut. Uh, if they can, to me, if they get somewhere near the midpoint of the NFL, which is 23, 24 points a game, it's another touchdown that they need to add, basically, then that gives them an opportunity. And I don't know about you, but do you feel like that's realistic for this group to get to 22, 23, 24 points a game, somewhere in that range?
Yeah, I think it is. I think, you've got a quarterback in Russell Wilson who can take advantage of the deep speed receivers. The deep ball was missing last year. And it's like, you've got these speedsters at receiver, and you really didn't make use of that aspect of the game. So it was almost like, they had to put aside part of their playbook. They couldn't fully open it up because they were limited. They were held back in certain aspects of it. So I do think it is conceivable that, they can add at least another touchdown per game to their average. But they need guys to stay healthy, and they just need that to come together. There have been times when we have seen them come out of the gate, from training camp, and the offense is just not cohesive enough. That's got to change this year.
It's interesting, Patty. While you were talking about the deep ball, there was a stat from Warren Sharp of Sharp Football that he posted the other day, that I think is applicable, and it speaks to that point. The stat that he posted says, if an offensive drive has no plays of at least 15 yards, teams score 15% of the time.
Mhm.
If you can get just one play of 15 or more yards, teams score 60% of the time.
Mm.
So, I mean, Russell Wilson in his moon ball, and Jameis Winston can throw the deep ball. He's got the big arm, and and Jackson Dart had as much success as any quarterback in college football last year throwing the deep ball. So that should be part of the package for the Giants in 2025. When you look at the offense, Patty, everybody talks about the offensive line. Um, and I think the quality of the offensive line centers on two players entering 2025. It centers on, can Evan Neal make a successful transition to guard and be a good guard? And it also centers on, can Andrew Thomas play 17 games?
Mm.
Um, your thoughts on the offensive line?
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I mean, Andrew Thomas, he's played what, 16 games over the last what, 2 years? That's not
Hmm.
good enough. You
And
know, I get it,
what,
injuries, no, he doesn't go out of his way to get injured, but it's concerning at this point considering where the injury is. The thing about football injuries is sometimes not all injuries are equal. Meaning, like if you're a receiver, obviously you don't want anything to happen to your legs. If you're an offensive lineman and you have something going on with your feet or your ankle when you have to push off of them, that could be a problem. So, sometimes you got to look at the nature of the injury. But yeah, definitely with Andrew Thomas, they need him in the lineup. And Evan Neal, the thing about Evan Neal that he could potentially bring is better run blocking. I mean, if you put any stock in Pro Football Focus in their grades, Evan Neal was their best run blocking offensive lineman last year, better than Andrew Thomas. And we've seen it. Evan Neal can move guys out of the way. It's his pass pro that's needs a little bit of refinement. And I think that's maybe why they haven't given up on him, because half of his game is where it maybe needs to be. It's the other half that they need to really bring up to speed.
yeah, so and I feel like with Evan Neal, I feel like he's a 25-year-old player, and it just puts the Giants in a better place with a 25-year-old player who could be, more of a long-term answer than a stopgap if he's a good guard than it does with a 35-year-old stopgap in the lineup. You agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I forget who said it, but I know we did a story on it over on New York Giants on SI. If you look at the Giants' offensive line, what's the future of that line? Guys eventually are going to move on, and do they have guys that can replace them? Now they added Marcus Bowe, who can be a replacement maybe if they decide to move on from Jermaine Illuminor, or if they need a right guard next year, maybe he could step in there. They've got Jake Kubas, who they're going to continue to develop as an interior lineman. But beyond that, do they have a lot of guys in reserve ready to go if something happens? And that to me is one of the big question marks that a lot of people aren't talking about as we start up camp.
Well, this is one of the things, Patty, why I always shake my head when a team doesn't spend at least some draft resources on offensive linemen. When you go for a year and you don't draft an offensive lineman, as good as Joe Shane's draft was in 2024, it didn't include an offensive lineman. And what are we talking about now? The fact that they don't have a lot of young offensive linemen. You look at, there are so many offensive linemen in the NFL. Greg Van Roten is a great example. How long did it take Greg Van Roten to become a starting lineman in the NFL? He was in his fifth, sixth, seventh year before he became a full-time starter. Jermaine Illuminor was 3 or 4 years into his career before he became a full-time starter. And both of those guys have had good, long, successful careers. Maybe Jake Kubas is the same way. Maybe Marcus Bowe is the same way. But for me, you have to keep throwing resources at that because you have to have a pipeline.
Absolutely. And that's a mistake they made. If you go back to after the Super Bowl, actually 2010, I can remember Kevin Gilbride in an interview saying, I started asking for offensive linemen in 2009 because he started to see the decline in the guys. And at the time, the Giants, what did they draft Justin Pugh? Was it 2013, I think?
2013, they went
They went
from
through a year.
2009 to 2013.
Uh,
2009, they drafted Will Beatty in the second round. They didn't
right.
spend another high draft resource on the line until 2013.
Right, and what happened? The offensive line became a weak spot, so you
Mhm.
definitely have to keep devoting resources to it. I laugh when I read opinions that said, "Oh, well, the Giants just invested high draft picks in the offensive line 2 straight years." Big deal. Keep doing it because
Mhm.
you can never have too many offensive linemen, and if this team hasn't
Patty,
proven that, I don't know what other evidence you need.
Patty, think about a football team. You need more offensive linemen than you need any other position in football. There are five of them on the field at the same time on every single play. And
Mhm.
that doesn't happen at any other position. If you should overdraft anywhere, it would be the offensive line
Absolutely.
because you just never know. I mean, even how many sixth and seventh round picks have had long, solid NFL careers? Some of those guys wash out, before their first contracts are over, but some of those guys become really good players. And it's a mistake any year that you don't add young players to an offensive line. Anyway, the other thing I wanted to point out about Andrew Thomas, he's all those games that he's missed. The Giants have been 3-15 over the last 2 years in the games that he's missed. Now, look, they've only been 6-10 in the games that he's played, but 6-10 is a whole lot better than 3-15, and it just points to how much difference that quality left tackle makes.
Sure. Absolutely. It's the key part position on the offensive line. So, you want him on the field. You absolutely do want him on the field. And, we talked about this a little bit on my show before, but the fact that we didn't see Andrew Thomas really at all this past spring, what's going on? Usually, if a guy is a little further along, he'll come out, he'll watch, be an observer, take the quote unquote mental reps. And I get it, they know what they have in Andrew Thomas, but it would have been nice, I think, and a little bit more reassuring if he had been able to come out and watch practices as opposed to sitting inside. Because now, your imagination tends to run wild. It's like, okay, is he that bad that they've got to keep him inside? Why are they keeping him inside?
Right. Patty, the thing that I kept coming back to. Now, granted, Theo Johnson's a little bit younger than Andrew Thomas. Theo Johnson is 50 to 60 pounds lighter than Andrew Thomas. But Theo Johnson had Lisfranc surgery last year as well. He had Lisfranc surgery after Andrew Thomas. Theo Johnson was a full participant in Giants practices all spring.
Hmm.
And it just, like you said, it puts up a red flag that makes you really need to see Andrew Thomas this summer.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everybody heals differently. I get it, but it's a good point. If it's the same surgery and the same, if they're putting a screw in the foot or whatever it is they do to fix it, you just kind of wonder. And, look, we saw Andrew Thomas, we saw that video of him throwing out the first pitch at the Yankees game. Now, granted, that was done after the camps were through. So maybe that's a good sign that, okay, Andrew Thomas was able to push off of that foot, but he was pushing off against his own body weight as opposed to another 300-pound, man across
Mhm.
the line from him. So just question marks there. And we should get the answers. I don't, on Tuesday, I'm sure the Giants will say who's starting on pup and who isn't, who passed their training camp physical. And I'm sure the Giants will probably be managing Andrew Thomas's reps, but I think he's got to be out there. Got to.
Absolutely. Patty, let's switch gears to the defensive side of the ball. And we know how many changes the Giants made on defense. And it was funny at the end of the year we heard John Mara say, I'm tired of watching teams go up and down the field on us on our defense. And the defense wasn't the Giants' biggest problem last year. But I think the bet that they've made is they could improve the defense and get to a top tier level on defense more quickly than they could get to a top tier level on offense. They drafted Abdul Carter. They drafted Darius Alexander. They signed Javon Holland. They signed Paulson Adebo. They added a couple of other veteran depth pieces, Chauncey Golston, Roy Robertson Harris. Um, for you, what's what's the ceiling and what's the floor for this defense for you in 2025?
Well, the ceiling is going to be top 10. No hands, no questions about it. I mean, they've got the pass rushers to get it done. That should help the back end of the defense, which is still relatively young. It's improved, but relatively young. But for me, the biggest question mark is up front, the defensive line. Now, anybody who's read me or listened to my show, I've been screaming about how Dexter Lawrence can't do it by himself. They brought in a whole bunch of other um, talent on that defensive line, especially to stop the run. The run defense has been a huge problem. You look at the film, the linebackers basically they were getting picked off at the second level by offensive linemen who were getting through to the second level, which created huge creases for opposing running backs. So that run defense, to me, that's the biggest question mark I have right now. Do they finally have guys that can occupy blockers? I mean, we saw instances last year, not Dexter, but other guys who were manhandled by single blocking. And these were bigger guys that were being manhandled. All right. So if you
Yeah,
can't have Dexter taking up 2 blocks and let's say Roy Robertson Harris taking up 2 blocks, then you're not going to have very good results in all likelihood. So the
right.
run defense to me is the biggest question mark. I think if the Giants' run defense can keep it to where they're forcing second and long, third and long. And I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I did a breakdown of this on New York Giants on SI. But the Giants, they gave up way too many second and short and third and short to their
Mhm.
opponent. That's got to change. Otherwise, you could have the greatest pass rushers in the world. Now,
Right,
no guarantee that, third down is going to definitely be a passing down.
right. We saw it last year, Patty, before Dexter Lawrence got hurt when he was on the field. He can't play every snap. He's a 340-pound man. He needs some rest. He needs some help. And whenever he was off the field, whoever they were playing would just turn around and hand the ball off. And running backs were 6 or 7 yards down the field before there was a defender in sight.
Exactly.
And that has to change. I mean, I think there should be optimism that will change because of the depth that they've had. Roy Robertson Harris has been a solid, not spectacular player for a long time. And an interesting conversation with defensive line coach Andre Patterson about Robertson Harris this spring too. Um, Andre Patterson was part of Robertson Harris's recruiting process in college. Tried to get him to the Minnesota Vikings. Has wanted to coach him his entire career. So we'll see if Coach Patterson can get even a little bit more out of Harris. But there should be some optimism with Robertson Harris, with Darius Alexander, with Raheem Nunez Roches playing the limited role he should play instead of being a 10-year veteran playing more snaps than he ever had in his career. So, but again, they've got to prove it. They've got to get on the field and prove it.
Absolutely. And with Raheem, look, I like Raheem. I know, they like him in the locker room. But the question I have is he's got what, a 5 million cap hit?
Right. Does he make the
Kind
team?
of a
Does he even
lot.
make the team? Yeah. Does he make the
Exactly. Kind
team?
of a lot if you're gonna have him be a
If
situational or
if
rotation.
he's yeah, if he's your fourth or fifth guy.
Yeah,
Absolutely. I hear you. Um, we talk about the defense and we talk about, the defensive line and all of that. What's the biggest thing on defense you need to see during training camp, Patty? The biggest question that you might have, entering camp.
the run defense. I mean, I know
Mm,
we won't see it unless the pads are on,
mhm,
but I wanna see that run defense. I wanna see guys, not getting caught up in the wash. I wanna see the linebackers being able to come through and penetrate the backfield. Um,
mhm,
like I said, it all starts with the run. The Giants have a really good pass rush. I'm not too worried about how Shane Bowen's gonna get them all on the field. I think he'll come up with a way. But again, if they're not stopping teams on first down and second down and creating, obvious pass situations, then what's the point of having all these great pass rushers? It's like, you have third and one, now you're the offense. You can run the ball or you can pass it.
mhm.
So it kind of thwarts the intention there. So I want to see a better run defense from the Giants. That's probably my number one thing on the defensive side.
And one of the key parts of that run defense is funneling these guys to the inside linebackers and having inside linebackers who can make plays, which leads me to ask you, we saw Bobby Okereke be tremendous for the Giants in 2023. He struggled more last year trying to figure out exactly what his role was in Shane Bowen's defense. Um, and then he got hurt with the herniated disc. And we saw him early in the spring on the field. Then he disappeared. And what the reason for that, was it the back again? Was it something else? Um, are you at all worried about Okereke?
I'd be lying if I said I wasn't, because the last time we saw something similar to this, and I'm not saying that it's the exact same situation, but remember when Evan Neal, they pulled him back and they said, "Oh, we're just gonna get him to training camp." Then we found out he had had a setback in his recovery
Hmm.
from ankle surgery, and it ended up costing him most of training camp. Now, I'm not saying that's what's gonna happen with Bobby, but anytime they pull a player back from practice, that
Hmm.
raises my antenna because I'm like, "Okay, what happened? What did he injure?" Because look,
Hmm.
Bobby takes pride in being out there and practicing and playing. He takes tremendous pride in that. And, he spoke, earlier in the spring. He talked about how he was starting to feel more comfortable, and we actually saw that towards before he got injured, he started to look more like himself. His production went up. But when a guy comes off the field, especially a guy who wants to be out there, that's gonna raise my antenna every time.
Absolutely. Patty, before I let you go, as we think about training camp, anything else that you're really looking forward to? Any storyline or any player in particular that you're really going to be paying attention to?
Well, I mean, just how the roster comes together, obviously, just because there's gonna be so much competition. And, I just wanna see how training camp is gonna be different this year, and by that, I mean, look, we know we get the same drills, we got 11 on 11, there's probably gonna be more 7 on 7, which we saw a little bit more of in the spring. Russell Wilson, I think, had suggested that to Brian Dable, but I wanna see how the bottom of the depth charts at certain spots play out. Like, for example, wide receiver, is Jalen Hyatt gonna finally crack into the top 4? And then how many receivers are they gonna keep? How's that gonna affect the number of tight ends they keep? And I said this on, my show. How many guys that the Giants end up cutting do the land elsewhere? Because that's gonna give you a little better idea of how good this roster really was. I mean, on paper, it looks great,
Mhm.
but no team, to my knowledge, has ever won a trophy for what they did in the offseason and what's on paper.
Absolutely. And I just want to see this team get to week one and play a truly competitive quality football game.
Yeah.
So we will see if that happens. And training camp begins on Wednesday. I will be there. Patty will be there. So, check out Big Blue View. Check out our show here on YouTube. Check out Patty's show over on Locked On Giants and all of her written work as well. And, we will bring you as much as we can as we get geared up for the 2025 season. So, Giants fans, thank you as always for watching. Please stay safe out there, take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.